The air inside that gymnasium smelled like fresh carnations and industrial floor wax, the specific combination that means someone's child is about to become something new. I was sitting in the third row, folding program in my lap, wearing the blue dress Maya had specifically approved 3 days earlier. She'd held it up in the doorway of my bedroom, tilted her head and said, "Yes, that one. You'll look like a mom, not like you're trying." I laughed for a full minute. That's Maya. Precise. Economical. Occasionally devastating. There were maybe 400 people in that room. Parents, grandparents, younger siblings squirming in metal chairs. Teachers in their faculty regalia. The principal at the edge of the stage, holding a leather binder. I had my phone out because I'd promised Maya I wouldn't cry before the speech even started, and having something to hold usually helps. When she walked to the podium, I forgot about the phone. She looked different up there. Not nervous. Not performing. Settled. Like she'd been building toward this exact moment for longer than any of us realized. She adjusted the microphone once. Looked out at the room. And then she said, "Before I thank anyone, there's something this room needs to hear." The woman next to me shifted in her seat. I felt my stomach drop about 3 inches. Maya reached into the inside pocket of her graduation robe and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The crease marks visible even from where I was sitting. The edges slightly soft the way paper gets when it's been handled, moved, protected. I knew that paper. I knew it the way you know the scar on your own hand. Without looking, without thinking, just a recognition that moves through your body before your brain has time to catch up. My throat closed. Because that letter was supposed to be in a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet. Behind the winter blankets. Inside a rubber-banded stack of things I'd never thrown away and never planned to revisit. And my 18-year-old daughter was holding it at a podium in front of 400 people. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just watched her smooth it open with both hands, careful, deliberate, and begin to read. My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 38 years old. I'm a licensed occupational therapist, and I've spent the last 11 years working primarily with pediatric patients. Children recovering from neurological injuries, developmental delays, the kind of setbacks that require someone to sit with them patiently week after week, and believe in their progress before they can believe in it themselves. I tell you my job not to establish credentials, but because it matters to understanding who I was before any of this happened. I am trained, professionally specifically, to observe behavior without reacting to it. To notice patterns. To document. Wait, those habits didn't just live at work. They followed me home. And eventually they saved me. I was 24 when I first looked into adoption. I'd been through a medical situation in my early 20s that made biological pregnancy unlikely. Unlikely in the way doctors say when they mean improbable but don't want to be final about it. I grieved that. I took about 8 months to fully grieve it. And then I decided that the way I became a mother mattered less to me than the fact of becoming one. I spent 2 years completing the licensing process, the home studies, the training, the waiting. I was 26 when my caseworker called me about a 6-year-old girl named Maya who had been in the foster system for 14 months and needed a permanent placement. I remember exactly where I was when I got that call. Standing in the parking garage of the hospital where I worked, holding a cold cup of coffee, watching the 4:47 p.m. light come through the concrete levels in long diagonal lines. I said yes before she finished the sentence. What I want you to understand, before I tell you about my parents, before I tell you about the letter, before I tell you about any of it, is that adopting Maya was not a consolation prize. It was not a workaround. It was not something I settled for. It was the most deliberate, clear-eyed, fully chosen decision I have ever made in my life. And I was so certain of that. So genuinely certain. Which is maybe why what came next hit the way it did. I called my parents that evening from my car. I told them everything. The caseworker, Maya's age, the timeline, the process. My mother listened without interrupting, which she almost never does. When I finished, there was a pause that lasted probably 4 seconds but felt geological. Then she said, "Diane, are you sure this is the right thing for you? A child from the system. You don't know what you're getting into." I told her I was sure. She said she'd talked to Dad. They didn't call back for 11 days. That should have been the first signal. It wasn't the last. Let me tell you something about Gerald and Patricia Calloway that you need to understand before any of the rest of this makes sense. They are not villains in the way movies make villains. They don't twirl. They don't monologue. They are two deeply conventional people from a deeply conventional suburb of Columbus who built their entire identity around the appearance of a certain kind of family, the kind with matching Christmas cards, biological grandchildren with their cheekbones, and a narrative they could hand to their church friends without any uncomfortable footnotes. My brother Kevin gave them that. Effortlessly. He married at 28, had 2 kids by 32, bought a house 12 minutes from my parents' place, and showed up to every Sunday dinner with a casserole dish and exactly the right amount of noise. I don't resent Kevin. He genuinely loves his life. But I watched, for years, the way my parents looked at him versus the way they looked at me. And the difference was not subtle. Kevin's kids, Brody and Lily, were, according to my mother, the greatest joy of her later years. She said this at Thanksgiving 2015, directly across the table from me, while I was still in the middle of my adoption licensing process. She was not being cruel. That's the part that's almost harder to explain. She was just being honest about a hierarchy she'd never once questioned. I had been quietly invisible in my own family for most of my adult life. But invisible is survivable. What came after Maya was something else entirely. The first concrete moment happened about 3 months after Maya came home. I'd finally gotten her settled. New school, new routine. A bedroom she'd decorated herself with those peel-off glow stars and a poster of a horse she'd named Gerald, which I found privately hilarious. We were doing well. She was a quiet kid, watchful, but she laughed easily once she trusted you, and she was starting to trust me. I invited my parents for dinner. Sunday. I made my mother's own pot roast recipe, the one she'd written out on an index card for me when I moved into my first apartment. I set the table properly. Maya wore her nicest sweater. She was nervous. I could tell by the way she kept straightening the napkins. My parents arrived 22 minutes late without calling. My father shook Maya's hand, shook it like she was a business contact, and my mother said, "Oh, she's small, isn't she?" and then moved past her into the kitchen to inspect what I was cooking. Dinner lasted 45 minutes. My mother spoke to Maya exactly twice, once to ask if she liked school, and once to tell her she had something on her sleeve. My father spoke to her 0 times. When they left, my mother hugged me at the door and said, "She seems like a good enough little girl. I hope this works out for you." Maya was standing 8 feet behind me when she said it. I hope this works out for you. Like I'd taken on a risky investment. Like Maya was a project I might abandon. I closed the door, turned around, and Maya was already walking back to her room. She paused at the hallway and said without turning around, "It's okay, Mama. Some people just need time." She was 6 years old. The second incident was Christmas, 2014, about 4 months later. Kevin's family was there, of course. My mother had gone to considerable effort. A 14-pound turkey, 3 kinds of pie, gifts wrapped in coordinated paper with velvet ribbon. Brody and Lily each received, I counted, 7 gifts. Wrapped. Labeled. Ozen. Maya received a gift card to Target for $25 in an unsealed envelope with her name spelled wrong. I know it sounds small, but I want you to sit with the specific arithmetic of that moment. 7 gifts for each biological grandchild. A $25 gift card misspelled in an unsealed envelope for the child who had been in their family for 4 months and who had already started calling my mother Grandma Pat, because I had encouraged her to, because I was still hoping. I was still genuinely hoping that they would come around. They did not come around. The third incident is the one that showed me this was not carelessness. This was policy. Maya's school held a Grandparents' Day event in the spring of 2015. It was a Friday morning, pancake breakfast, classroom visit, the whole production. Maya had made a card at school with her handprints on it. She'd been talking about it for 2 weeks. She asked me very carefully if I thought Grandma Pat and Grandpa Gerald might come. I called my mother on a Monday to ask. She said she'd check their calendar. She called back Wednesday and said they had a prior commitment. Her garden club's spring luncheon. Non-negotiable. She'd been on the committee. The following Tuesday, I ran into my mother at the pharmacy 3 miles from their house. I almost didn't say anything, but I asked, quietly in the greeting card aisle, how the garden club luncheon had gone. She looked at me blankly for just a half-second too long. Then she said, "Oh, it was lovely. Very well attended." I went home and I opened a new note on my phone. I typed the date, the location, and exactly what she had said. That was March 14, 2015. That note became a document. That document eventually became 43 entries. I didn't know then what I would use it for. I just knew that what was happening to Maya, and to me, deserved to be witnessed by someone. Even if that someone was only me. 2 weeks after Maya came home, I had believed, naively, stubbornly, with a specific optimism of someone who has not yet been fully educated by their own family, that my parents were still in a period of adjustment, that they were processing, that the stiffness at dinner, the short phone calls, the way my mother changed the subject whenever I mentioned a milestone of Maya's, all of it was temporary discomfort moving toward acceptance. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday in November. Cold. One of those Ohio mornings where the sky is the exact same gray as the sidewalk, and everything feels slightly underwater. I had just gotten home from a half-day at work. Maya was at school. I had 40 minutes before pickup, and I was planning to use them to sit down with a cup of tea and do absolutely nothing. I heard a car in the driveway. My parents walked up to my door together, which was unusual. They typically arrived in the loosely coordinated way of two people who've been married long enough to move on parallel tracks. My father slightly ahead, my mother slightly behind. But that morning they were side by side, and something about that alignment made my stomach tighten before I even opened the door. I let them in. I offered coffee. My mother said no thank you and sat down at my kitchen table without taking off her coat. My father sat beside her, also coat on, and placed both hands flat on the table in front of him like he was preparing to chair a meeting. I sat across from them. My mother reached into her purse and placed an envelope on the table. Letter-sized. My name written on the front in her handwriting. She slid it across to me with 2 fingers. She said, "We think it's better if you read it here, with us present, so there's no misunderstanding about what we mean." I looked at my father. He was looking at the table. I opened the envelope. The letter was typed. 3 paragraphs. I remember the font, Times New Roman 12-point, the same font my mother used for her church newsletter committee minutes, which I know because I used to proofread them for her in high school. The first paragraph said that they had spent considerable time in prayer and reflection and had come to a decision about our relationship going forward. The second paragraph said that while they wished me no ill will, they could not in good conscience invest emotionally or financially in a family structure they did not recognize as sound, that they had concerns, which they did not specify, about Maya's background and what it would mean for their existing family, that they did not want to create confusion for Kevin's children about what family meant. The third paragraph said that they thought it best if we created some distance, that they would not be attending events or holidays going forward. That they hoped I understood this came from a place of love. Came from a place of love. I read the whole thing twice. The kitchen was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming. Then I looked up. I said, "You typed this." My mother said, "We wanted to be clear." I said, "She's 6 years old. She made you a card with her handprints on it." My father said, still not looking at me, "Diane, this isn't about the girl." The girl. He called her the girl. I stood up. I folded the letter back into the envelope. My hands were steady, which surprises me even now when I think about it. I walked to the front door and opened it. I said, "I think you should go." My mother stood, smoothed her coat and said, "And I will never for the rest of my life forget this. We hope someday you'll understand that we're thinking of the whole family." I didn't answer. They walked out. My father pulled the door shut behind him with a soft, final click. I stood in my hallway for a moment. Then I walked to the kitchen, sat back down in my chair, and looked at the envelope on the table. I had 1 hour and 17 minutes before I needed to pick up Maya from school. I sat in that chair for most of them. Then I washed my face, changed my shirt, drove to Lincoln Elementary, and stood at the pickup line with my sunglasses on even though the sky was still gray. When Maya came out, her backpack swinging, she spotted me from 30 feet away and waved with her whole arm the way only young children wave. Completely unself-consciously, like the whole world should see. I waved back. I never told her about the letter. I folded it back inside its envelope, put it in a shoebox, put the shoebox on the highest shelf in my closet, behind the winter blankets, and I went on with the business of being her mother. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 12 years is a long time to be disowned. Long enough to stop flinching every time a family event rolls around. Long enough to build new traditions. Maya and I spent every Thanksgiving at a community kitchen 3 blocks from our apartment, serving food from 11 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and then coming home and making whatever we actually wanted for dinner, which was usually breakfast food. Eggs, toast, turkey, bacon, hot chocolate. The kind of meal that has nothing to prove. Long enough to watch your daughter become someone extraordinary and feel, genuinely feel, that the people who chose to miss it were the ones who lost something. Not you. But I want to be honest with you. Because this channel is not a place for curated strength. The truth is that there were hard years inside those 12. Years where Maya would come home from a friend's house. A friend whose grandparents had driven 2 hours to watch a soccer game. And she would be quieter than usual for the rest of the evening. She never said why. She didn't have to. He knew. And I would lie awake those nights running the same calculation I'd been running for years. Whether telling her the truth would free her or just transfer the weight from my shoulders to hers. I chose to keep carrying it. What I did not do, and this is where my professional instincts either saved me or simply revealed something that was already true about who I am, was stop documenting. The note on my phone that I'd started in March of 2015 continued growing. Quietly. Without urgency. 43 entries over 12 years documenting dates. Quotes, incidents and context. The grandparents' day absence. The misspelled gift card. The Christmas that came and went every year without a call. And then, in 2019, something new. Maya was 13. She had just been accepted into a competitive regional STEM program. And I had made the mistake of mentioning it to Kevin during a rare phone call. Kevin, to his credit, genuinely congratulated her. But somewhere between that call and the following week, the information reached my parents. My mother called me, the first time she'd called me in almost 2 years, and opened with, "I heard Maya got into that science program. That's wonderful." I said thank you and waited because I have learned that when my mother calls with a compliment, there is always a second sentence. She said, "Your father and I have been talking. We'd like to help with her future. College specifically. We have some money set aside and we'd be willing to contribute, but we'd want to have a relationship with her directly." Just her. We think at 13 she's old enough to make her own choices about who she spends time with. The room went very still. She was offering to fund my daughter's college education in exchange for Maya distancing herself from me. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I'll think about it." Hung up. I opened my phone's notes document. I typed the date, the time, the exact wording I could remember. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I called my phone back from my work phone and left myself a voicemail, reading the note aloud, while the memory was still fresh, time-stamped by the phone carrier. 31 seconds of audio. Preserved. What I did not know, what I would not discover until 3 weeks before graduation, was that Maya already knew. She'd been in the hallway when I took that call. She was 13, quiet-footed, and she heard every word through a door I thought was closed. She didn't say anything to me. She processed it the way she processes most things, internally, completely, and with a patience that still astonishes me. But she remembered. And this is the part that stopped my breath when she finally told me. 2 years before graduation, while helping me reorganize my closet, she had found the shoebox. She knew which box to look in because she recognized my handwriting on the lid. She said she'd assumed it was old letters or photographs. She opened it, found the envelope, and read the letter. She put it back exactly as she found it. Replaced the shoebox behind the winter blankets. Said nothing. She was 16 years old. She carried that for 2 years. Alone. That was the moment when she told me this 3 weeks before graduation, sitting at our kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug, that I truly understood who my daughter is. Not because she found the letter, but because she chose not to give me the weight of knowing she'd found it until she was ready to do something with it. She looked at me across that table and said, "I want to read it at graduation. I want people to know. Is that okay with you?" I sat with that for a long time. Then I said, "It's your truth too. You decide." Here is what most people don't understand about quiet people. The silence is not emptiness. The silence is construction. While my parents spent 12 years assuming I had simply absorbed their rejection and moved on, while they attended their garden club luncheons and their Sunday dinners with Kevin's family and built a version of events in which they were simply grandparents who'd made a difficult but principled choice, I had been building something. Not out of revenge. I want to be precise about that. I did not spend 12 years plotting. I spent 12 years parenting. But I also spent 12 years being a person who notices things, writes things down, and understands that documentation is not paranoia. It is self-respect made legible. When Maya told me she wanted to read the letter at graduation, I made 2 phone calls the following morning. The first was to a family law attorney named Sandra Park, whom I'd been referred to years earlier by a colleague and whose number I'd kept in my phone without entirely knowing why. I told Sandra about the 2019 phone call, my mother's offer to fund college in exchange for a relationship with Maya that excluded me. I told her about the voicemail. I told her about the 43-entry document. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That offer, depending on how it was framed, could be characterized as an attempt to manipulate a minor's familial relationships for financial leverage. It's not criminal, but it is documentable. And if anyone ever tries to reframe the history of this estrangement publicly, you have a contemporaneous record that tells a different story." I asked her what I should do with it. She said, "Nothing right now. Just make sure everything is organized and accessible. Sometimes the value of documentation is simply that it exists." Thanked her. I organized the notes into a 12-page PDF, dated entries, the voicemail transcript, the Christmas gift card details, the grandparents' day absence, and I saved it in 3 places. My personal drive, a printed copy in a file folder, and emailed to Sandra for her records. I was not building a court case. I was building a record of reality that could not be gaslit out of existence. The second call was to my brother Kevin. This one was harder. Kevin and I have a relationship built on careful avoidance. We don't discuss our parents. We don't discuss Maya. We exist in a cordial parallel, texting on birthdays, occasionally grabbing coffee when we're both in the same part of the city. He is not a bad person. He is a person who has chosen comfort over confrontation every single time, and I made peace with that a long time ago. But I called him, and I told him what Maya was planning to do at graduation. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Diane, are you sure that's a good idea? Mom and Dad are going to." I said, "Kevin, I'm not calling to ask your permission. I'm calling to give you the opportunity to know in advance, because I think that's fair." Another silence. He said, "Are they going to be there?" "At graduation." I said, "They weren't invited." He said, "Okay." That was the whole conversation. What I want you to notice about the 2 weeks between Maya telling me her plan and the morning of graduation is this. I did not warn my parents. I did not give them the chance to preemptively shape the narrative, reach out to Maya, or manufacture a reconciliation gesture timed for maximum sympathy. I simply let the calendar move. My parents had spent 12 years assuming that silence meant forgiveness. That because I hadn't made noise, there was nothing to hear. They were wrong. Graduation morning, I woke up at 5:47 a.m. before my alarm. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the quiet. Maya came downstairs at 7, hair still damp, holding her graduation robe over her arm. She placed the folded letter on the table between us. She said, "I practiced it 4 times last night. I'm not nervous." I looked at her. This 18-year-old person I had chosen and who had, without any obligation to do so, chosen me back so completely and so publicly that it still undoes me to think about. I said, "I know you're not." She picked up her coffee mug, looked out the window at the May morning and said, It's going to be a good day. She was right. So let me bring you back to that gymnasium. 400 people. The smell of carnations and floor wax. Maya at the podium, the letter unfolded in her hands. She read it in full. Every typed line. Every careful, cold paragraph in Times New Roman 12-point font. The part about not recognizing our family structure as sound. The part about not wanting to create confusion for Kevin's children. The part one still find the hardest, about it coming from a place of love. She read it in a steady voice. No drama. No tears. The same calm, precise delivery she uses for everything that matters to her. The room was absolutely silent. I mean silent in a way that 400 people in a gymnasium almost never are. The kind of silence where you become aware of the ventilation system and the sound of your own heartbeat. When she finished, she folded the letter back along its original creases, held it in both hands, and looked directly at me. She said, "This woman drove 40 minutes each way to every single one of my therapy appointments for 3 years. She learned sign language for 6 months because I was having trouble with auditory processing and she wanted to have another way to talk to me. She worked overtime for 4 months so I could go on the STEM trip to Washington, D.C. She never once, not once, made me feel like I was something she had settled for." Pause. She chose me when she didn't have to. And I choose her, every single day. The room came back to life slowly, the way sound returns after something loud. A few people, then more, then the kind of sustained applause that has emotion underneath it rather than just politeness. The teacher sitting 2 seats from me was crying. A woman I'd never met, 3 rows back, reached forward and touched my shoulder for exactly 1 second. I pressed my hand over my mouth and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Now let me tell you what happened after. My parents were not in that gymnasium. But their world was. Their neighbor Margaret, who has attended the same church as my parents for 22 years, was there for her own granddaughter's graduation. 3 people from my father's former workplace sat in the row behind me. My mother's closest friend from her garden club had come to see another family's child walk across that stage. By that evening, my mother had received 4 phone calls. I know this because Kevin called me the following morning. He said our mother had been, in his words, completely blindsided. That she'd told the callers it was complicated, that there were things people didn't understand, that Maya was confused. Nobody found that persuasive. Because they had heard the letter read aloud by the 18-year-old girl it had been written to exclude. In her own voice. Without bitterness. There is no counter-narrative strong enough to survive that. My father called me 2 days later. It was the first time he'd called my number in over a decade. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. 2 minutes and 14 seconds. That was mostly composed of the word complicated, and something about wanting to have a conversation when things settled down. I did not call back. I also formally shared my documentation file with Sandra. Not to initiate legal action, but to create a sealed, attorney-held record of the estrangement history. Should my parents ever attempt to insert themselves into Maya's life through legal or financial means as she navigates adulthood, that record exists. Organized. Timestamp. Thorough. Maya starts university in September. She has a full academic scholarship. Earned, not gifted, not contingent on anyone's approval of her family structure. She calls me every day. Sometimes twice. Last week she called to tell me her roommate had asked about her family. She said she'd described her family as small but extremely well curated. I laughed for a full minute. That's Maya. Precise. Economical. Occasionally devastating. I've thought a lot about what I want to say about all of this now that the dust has settled. Here's what I keep coming back to. I spent 12 years protecting Maya from a truth I thought would hurt her. And all that time, she was protecting me from knowing she already knew it. We were 2 people quietly holding the same weight, separately, because we loved each other enough to carry it alone. I don't know if my parents will ever understand what they lost. I've stopped needing them to. What I know is this. The love that gets documented, that gets chosen, that gets read aloud from a podium without a tremor in the voice, that is not lesser love. That is not second-best love. That is the kind of love that holds. Have you ever been made to feel that you had to justify your family to the people who were supposed to already be in it? If this story found you today, if something in it pressed on something old and specific in yours, I want you to know that the quiet you've been keeping is not weakness. Sometimes it is the most precise, most patient form of power there is. You don't have to perform your pain. You don't have to explain your choices to people who have already decided not to understand them. You just have to keep building. Keep documenting. Keep choosing your people and letting your people choose you back. That's enough. That has always been enough. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me. Where are you watching from, and who has your back the way Maya has mine? I read every single one. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is for everyone who has ever been underestimated by the people who should have known better. Subscribe because there are more stories coming. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it. Sometimes the right story finds someone at exactly the right moment. I'll see you in the next one.